Hi there, Glocal Citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I'm your host, Florence Adu, and I'm coming to you from Accra. And I'm so excited for my conversation. I'm always excited, so maybe I should pick a new word, guys. Maybe y'all can tell me a word better than excited, but I'm excited to do this show every day, so every time I'm doing it. So in any case, I'm very happy to be hosting the person that you're going to be hearing from today, because we have a long history. When we reconnected, we were thinking, okay, wow, how long has it been? And so this is a true Glocal citizen, folks. And so you'll really get a sense of how it is to just live and work and play all around the world. And so I'll get right to his bio. He is the president and CEO of Cajary Majlis, the exclusive distributor of Mutombo Coffee, co-founded by NBA Hall of Famer and a global humanitarian, Dikembe Mutombo. Cajary Majlis, an international trader of commodities and distributor of food and feed products from around the world, uses its networks, talents, and resources to solve challenging problems related to building commodity businesses in emerging markets. He's established himself as a seasoned senior investment executive with experience across industries like advanced manufacturing, financial services, energy, ICT, e-health, life sciences, security, and retail. In geographies, as I mentioned, such as the US, Europe, China, Middle East, and Africa. I think that covers all continents, maybe just not the far east, but he's been around the world, as well as asset classes like venture capital, private equity, and Islamic finance. He also advises the European Commission on public-private partnerships and is an SME advisor for the EC's Horizon 2020 initiative. In spring 2020, he became an advisor to Ahmed bin Sulayem, the executive chairman of the Dubai Multi-Commodities Center in the UAE. Previously, he served as managing director to the corporate office of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Prime Minister of the UAE. He speaks frequently to governments, universities, and corporates, and is a contributing writer to Forbes Middle East edition online. Robert Bob Bush Jr., welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Florence. It's good to see you. Your smile is as effervescent as I recall.
It's just the glee in seeing familiar faces. So yes, thank you. Thank you. So Bob, let's get right to it. First question, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
I am from the city of East St. Louis, which is in southern Illinois on the border of the Mississippi River, which is bifurcates Illinois and Missouri. On the west, it's St. Louis, Missouri. On the east, it's East St. Louis, Illinois. My craft, that's an interesting term, and I know you're using it with some intentionality, because when I think of craft, I think of like handicrafts, I think of carpentry, I think of things that maybe have some beauty. And so what I do primarily with my day is I wouldn't consider it, although occasionally I have to be a bit crafty. You know, it's tough out here trying to make an honest buck and have social impact. So craft can be used in the terms of sort of what are my hobbies in a sense. So we can talk about if that's what you mean, or really kind of, I'm going to interpret it less about what I do in my free time because I have so very little free time. I think I'm going to define craft as, what is my work? How do I spend the majority of my professional time? And I think it comes, when I'm sort of thinking aloud about that term, but when you think about traits, right? I've got 2 kids, and Curtis has certain traits. And I wonder if those traits are going to end up turning into some kind of profession or some kind of craft, as you suggest. And so my base trait is curiosity. I've always been very curious and asked a lot of why, and I still ask a lot of why. So I think if I had to say what my craft was in some kind of pithy sentence for you, my craft is the ability to turn a why into a why not.
Okay. I like it. And I think your work measures that out. So that's a very interesting perspective on craft. Thinking more, you didn't really say where you are local. And I think, we caught up. So where would you consider your your most present self to be local? Not necessarily your physical presence, but your most present self to be local.
Oh boy. Well, I've heard on occasion to get out of my head. So I'm always there somewhere. But locally is, I think what I like about your show and your use of the term glocal is that there's very little, local in perspective and, again, trying to define the terms a little bit. Local has a connotation of being provincial. He's kind of local in his mindset or local in his or her perspective. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not that. Even when I was coming from a small little town in southern Illinois, I never had a local mindset. So since we're defining the term not necessarily based on physicality, I've never been local. I've lived in small towns. I've lived in big cities. I've traveled to the bush of Africa. I have sat in palaces and mansions and all of that. And for me, it really is, and I'm fortunate this way, and I didn't really understand the blessing or the trait. I'm pretty comfortable, like everywhere. Like, in fact, I can't think of a place that I would say these are my roots. My roots are my family, and as long as I know they're fine and have access to them, I'm happy. So it's almost like saying, where is your God or where is your church? It is with me. And so having that sense of comfort, I can really be anywhere. I localize and turn whatever space I'm in into a mini version of, Bob Bushville, right? Mm-hmm. So practically speaking, I'm currently in Florida near Orlando, okay. But my clothes are in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And one of my partners likes to say, and everywhere I go, I leave, I only have 2 kids, that's for sure. But I leave what he calls Robbie droppings. Oh, I've got a winter coat in Canada. I've got some slippers in Miami. I've got some Bermuda shorts in Hawaii. Like if I had, I could, wherever I am, I've got some clothes and some stuff that I cannot even have to bring a bag with me in many cases. So no, I think the local bit for me, it really is kind of a glocal bit, whereas wherever you are, can you bring your authentic self, and are you in a place that will accept that?
I love that. So a nice way of thinking about presence of place beyond just the physicality of where we are. And I taking a page out of your book, I am working towards that myself. So when I travel to Colorado, I just have a carry-on. So because I leave things there, the thing is the accumulation piece of it. So still trying to figure out like how not to accumulate all these things in other places as well. Cause you kind of want to feel as comfortable as possible, no matter where you are. So that's a science that is going to be worked on.
Target. There's a Target and a Walmart. Just buy some new underwear and a t-shirt and keep it moving.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, much easier said by the masculine presenting than the feminine presenting, but I get it.
As I recall, you dress very lovely. So no, I'm in a t-shirt and a jacket. So yeah, no one's expecting me to be an icon of fashion. So you're right. It's easy for me to get away with it.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So tell us now how you decided that the world was your oyster. So you come from a town, a city in Missouri, and now you have called home at least 4 countries. How did that happen? How did you get on this journey that is who Bob is today?
Yeah, oysters are okay, and so I'll eat them, but we'll have to come up with a better metaphor perhaps. But I'll tell you, when I was little kid, again, being in the Mississippi River. And as you know, historically, river towns typically have a lot of throughput, right? It's civilizations develop around or near the water.
Yes.
And I had the privilege of a close family-knit family on the east side. On the east side of that river, it was really like a tale of 2 cities, frankly, right? You had 90+% African American on the east side of the Mississippi. And then you'd cross the bridge, and I took a bus to high school, 2 buses, in fact, every day to get there. And then as you're driving towards the St. Louis side, you see this wonderful arch and welcome to the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
But when you would drive from the St. Louis side to the east side of the Mississippi, there was no skyline to speak of. There was no welcoming. And I would contemplate that and I would notice that and I would go, well, why do they have the arch and the side that I live in doesn't? And then I was, I'm sitting in class with my mates and listening to kind of conversations and what they did for the weekends and what they, what they were wearing and what they were reading and just their experiences was different than the experiences that many of my friends on the east side was having. So I learned very early on because of that commute that the world was bigger than my neighborhood and that the aspirations and the people, they didn't look much different, maybe in skin tone perhaps, but the aspirations, the interests, the sense of humor, all of that was very, very similar. So I very quickly realized that the world was bigger and that it didn't really take much effort to go from one space to another. And so that kind of Tale of Two Cities really put me, I think, on the path where whether it's the bridge crosses the Mississippi or the London Bridge, cross it, see what's going on, and try to, going back to your earlier question, try to make it your home, try to make it your own.
Okay. And so your first degree is as a Juris Doctor. So you're a lawyer by training and beyond your undergraduate. And so what attracted you to law? And then how did that transition you into finance?
Yeah, so after Amherst, I went to Johns Hopkins and studied economics. And I initially thought that I was going to go to grad school to get an MBA because to the point I thought I would go directly into finance. But I was actually on a trip to Dubai in 1990 to visit a friend and his family. And I'm talking to one of the sheikhs there. And he says, and literally we were in one of the only hotels that was in Dubai at the time. And we're in this hotel. There was a tent that they had built. And you had these older gentlemen wearing sandals and smoking shisha and having tea. And I literally stuck my head into the tent, looked around, and they looked at me. I looked at them, and I didn't rush out. I'm curious. I'm there because I want to say, hey, what's going on here? And come. So they invited me in, and I had a wonderful conversation. And the gist of that conversation was, why are you here? And I said, I'm on vacation. And they laughed, like, who's going for vacation in 1990 in Dubai? This is before Dubai Inc. and all of the stuff that you see now with the Palm Islands and the celebrity visits and all that. This was still quite, simple in the lifestyle. As I said, there were maybe one or two hotels total in Dubai. Now there are literally hundreds. And so I'm talking to these guys, and they said, it's great that you're here, Bob, but we don't need you. And I thought that was a very odd thing to say. And they said, we don't need you because we have our own kids. We're sending them to the West. We're sending them to schools all over the world. So if you really are curious about what we're doing here, learn my culture, learn my language. Don't try to communicate with me through your head. Communicate to me through your heart. Then you may have a place with us and we'd welcome that. And that was a turning point. No longer being interested in finance of it. And it was the culture, the language. So instead of applying to get an MBA, I applied to Johns Hopkins to study international relations, economics, Africa, and the Middle East. And I immersed myself in those disciplines, not knowing when I'd ever or if I'd ever get back to Dubai. As you may recall, in the 1990s, there was a lot of international trade going on, but it was all Eastern Europe. No money was really flowing into Dubai or the Middle East, certainly not for the purposes of economic development and international finance. So that was the turning point of me recognizing that if I really wanted to be local or a global citizen and do things on an international playing field, I needed to spend more time thinking about the people that those numbers and those dollars would affect, more so than just what the dollars would look like.
Wow, that's pretty profound.
And then, yes, because I picked up a law degree because after my experience in traveling and my experience at Johns Hopkins at SAIS, it was apparent to me at least that I would have to supplement the economics, the finance, the relations, the language with the understanding of law. Because in many of these emerging markets, the rule of law and the role of private ownership and private property and capital markets development was also policy centric. That if I were really going to be a small part of the development of some of these economies, being well grounded in the legal aspects of that was important as well. So that's when I went to the University of Virginia.
Okay. All right. So in your heart of hearts, though, business makes you, gives you, it lights you up. Would you say that? It lights you up?
Yeah, but so business without objective. My objective has never been about making a lot of money. Making a lot of money is a byproduct of doing something well. And so the highest compliment in business is, are you creating value? Are you serving a need? And if you're doing those things, clearly you're going to have to negotiate to make sure that you get a fair price for the value you're creating. And the market is full of people that would love for you to just give and not give back. So you have to, as we were talking offline, to figure out ways to sort of monetize that. But just as you've done with 200 plus episodes, as you start thinking about monetization and the business of your thought leadership, you have to have the supply first. You actually have to have, going back to the first question, you actually have to have a craft or a skill first. So what do you want me to buy? And so that's an investment. And so when you really think about what business is first, you're making an investment. You've got to have supply of talent, of treasure of some sort. And then you figure out a way to amplify that through the value that you create, identifying people that want to pay you justly for the need or the value that you're creating on their behalf. So that's what business means to me. It's wonderful when you find a partnership that can pay you well for it, but that's not the primary driver.
Yes, I want to put a pin on a topic that I want to bring up with you. But first, let's talk about why the where, because you just talked about, having this experience in Dubai and then somehow landing there as your, where your biggest bag is. And so I want to kind of switch it up on the why the where to ask you a little bit more about why the where of how you came to be living, working, and playing around this new role that you've taken on with Mutombo Coffee. So what's the why the where of that?
Yeah, it dovetails to your previous question, right? So I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Mutombo 30 something odd years ago. He went to Georgetown with my sister, and I would come down from New York pretending to look after her, but she was very capable of looking after herself, of course, at Georgetown. But through her, I met Mr. Mutombo and Alonzo Mourning, because those Georgetown Hoya boys were kicking butt on the scene.
Yeah.
So that was my first exposure to that quality of play. And then they went on to have obviously very, very significant basketball careers and post careers. So it was, the seeds were laid to form a partnership with Dikembe 30 plus years ago. And I just didn't know how that was going to all come back. So I'm in Dubai 4 years ago. He sits on the Special Olympics Committee. Dubai was hosting the Olympics, and we were having dinner. Since he had retired from basketball, he has had a very substantial foundation that is a hospital that he named after his mother, the Biambi Marie Hospital in the Congo. He named that hospital after his mother because, unfortunately, while he was on this path to being a superstar athlete, his mother passed because of lack of health care in his home country. He never got to see a lot of his success. His initial interest in going to the States and going to Georgetown was to become a doctor. He ended up studying languages and some other things. And so his desire to make his mother proud by, even though he did not be a doctor, by building her a hospital that would employ many doctors. What a wonderful gift that he could give his parents and to his mother. So 4 years ago, when we're talking about what he's doing next. We were talking about his aim to build a school and some other things that he had going on. And it was apparent to me that my sense of purpose and his passion were very complementary. I wasn't interested in getting directly involved in this vision, but I was very interested in using the skills of business and entrepreneurship and government advisory that I had used for others to see how I can bring that into creating a model that I call sort of social enterprise 2.0.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the ability to create economically sustainable business models for people that we are trying to also have a significant social impact. And we chose coffee because coffee is ubiquitous in the Congo. Not a lot of it is traded because the trade routes were horrible because of all shenanigans internationally and within the country. Very little coffee is coming out of the Congo, but it's a world-class product. Many don't know that Africa is the birthplace of coffee. And so when we were looking for something to work on, we knew if we had a world product because a port called Mocha, the Mocha port in Yemen, it was where coffee first started going internationally, that Ethiopia place of coffee. And so we knew we had a world-class product that no one could associate with Africa because no one knows that the Italians don't grow coffee beans. But that's where they were getting it for hundreds of years. Similarly with Ghana and the Ivory Coast. Swiss Miss, she doesn't grow any cocoa beans in Switzerland. Those cocoa beans were coming from Ghana and the Ivory Coast. So when you start unpeeling the layer here, the question, we had a very high-class problem. What do we want a business to build? The continent of Africa is so rich in everything, and it's been mined, and it's been leveraged for centuries. And so I want to put an African man's name on the product. I want to source it from African countries, and we're going to build a world-class model that will get this product all over the world. And we're going to be very intentional about how we source. Women make up the bulk of the harvesting in these countries, but they don't make up the bulk on the trading side. So there's gender inequities, there's pay inequities, there's all these kinds of things. And so we could, through the power of our purse, affect some change and also bring a product that meets a real need or demand globally. So it was a very analytical process for us to figure out how can we do good and offer something to the world who want it. And now it becomes just a branding and education. And then we had to build the infrastructure.
Okay. So interestingly, we are dealing with, many in the world don't know so much about this, but we are dealing with, there's conflict, there's civil conflict in the Congo. And so how are you all thinking about how that's going to impact your business? What kind of, risk analysis and assessment or pivots or what have you kind of instituted or thinking about in order to, safeguard not only your supply, but also your logistics?
Yeah, it's a great question. In the best of times, there's a reason why there wasn't a lot of coffee coming in the United States bearing the name of Africans or African Americans, right? And so not only do you have civil conflict that you're suggesting, you had COVID. So it wasn't just particular to my business. The whole world was shutting down, having difficulties, right? Those ships weren't just coffee. They were carrying everything and nothing was happening. And so this sounds a little bit odd, but when you're in the beginning of your business, you encounter so many sort of major challenges. You build the business from a risk perspective out of the gate. It was difficult to get the supply because you had civil conflict and COVID. It was difficult if you had the supply to create the demand because no one was in the coffee shops or in the hotels or in the corporations anyway. Who builds a business when both the supply is jacked up and the demand is jacked up? Well, Mutombo Coffee did. Had worked in emerging markets for 20 plus years in conditions never optimal. I was not intimidated by it. Neither was my team. It was just, we knew there was going to be a challenge. And when you're building your model, it's smart to have resiliency in your model anyway. So it didn't matter to me what the shock was going to be. I knew there was going to be a shock. I couldn't tell you what it was going to be, but stuff is happening. So be ready. Your risk mitigation strategy is, how are you going to have redundancy? How are you going to have resiliency? Don't run out of money. How are you going to keep the quality control up? How are you going to create that entire supply chain and that value chain, a trusted link of relationships? All these things you need to do anyway. The fact that the catalyst happened to be identifiable like COVID or a particular conflict. So is secondary. Assume the shock, right? And so it did cause us to not just focus on the Congo, because in the northeastern part of the Congo, there's a lot of civil unrest, as you know, even now. And so we diversified. We sourced from 9 African countries. Mm-hmm. And I have to assume at any given time out of those 9, there will be several where there's just going to be some shenanigans. It is what it is. And so we've built that resiliency out of the gate. It took us longer to do, but now that we've done so, we are able to draw upon 9 countries and dozens of relationships to make sure that we can get the coffee quality that we need, and putting in that hard work first because the market demanded it and because that's the way you have to build a business. You couldn't shortcut that because no one could, even if you wanted to. That just makes us a stronger business.
So I'm just curious about, there's always this concern about the raw materials versus the finished product leaving the country. And so in these particular cases, are you adding value before you're sending off? Are you sending the beans and you have like a standardized process that you go through at your facilities? What's that like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that is exactly where we want to take the model. So at this present time, the coffee is coming over as green, and the value added is actually done in Dubai, where we have a roasting partnership, or in the United States, and soon to be London, right? And so the value added to be close to the consumer.
Yeah.
Once we actually start seeing Africa as a buyer of the roasted, it's 2 years. Mm-hmm. But once you roasted the coffee, it starts to literally within weeks start to lose its flavor profile. So you don't want to have a lot of that starting to happen, right? It's on our other places. Then we want that value to be there. But the fact of the matter is, as we're building the demand, we want the shelf life of green coffee roasted in the continent, sitting there, having to come on a ship, which could be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and in a warehouse at the importer in New Orleans, where we have an office, or Seattle, or New York, New Jersey. So it doesn't make sense to do a lot of that value added at the source when we are actually selling it in the West and outside of the continent. But I had a very interesting conversation with a group of women about a year or so ago, a little bit more than a year ago, about this value added question.
Likely,
right?
Yeah.
And said that, Mr. Bob, thank you. We're selling more coffee. You're helping us with all these other issues. But I'll tell you something. I'm old, I'm tired, I'm hot, and my kids don't want the business. So there are a couple ways to think about that, right? The first way to process that is, the business lens is, my supply might drop if the people that are supplying me don't want to be in the business in a long-term way. How am I going to build all this demand and then can't actually get the beans if the people that are, right? Because the next generation doesn't want to be farmers. And in fact, for the most part, the parents don't want to be farmers. They're now going to great schools and traveling all around the world. And if you can earn a living through speaking and writing and not picking cherries, that's a better gig, of course, right? So through the business lens, it's like, gosh, as we are trying to create a sustainable model, the suppliers themselves don't necessarily want to be in this for the very long term, which is why you see a lot of industrialization in these farms and stuff that get bought up, and then mechanization and all these sorts of things. So that's a real business concern. And then there's the lens of the social impact. And the social impact lens is, to the point of adding value, she wanted to retire. She just didn't want to be making a living that way. So we started thinking about ways we can do that. And there are some very cool ideas that we've got in our R&D pipeline about how to use coffee waste in ways so we can put factories in the ground there. You can do things around biomass, you can do things around textiles, you can do a lot of other added value kinds of business model in country that gets that that woman out of the field and at least into a factory where there's a little bit more air conditioning.
Yeah, we're not all built for the heat, I guess. But I love the thinking around that, because it's a true reality of living in the developing world, because comfort is a desire of many. And we know that tilling the land and tending the land isn't something that's inherent in the hearts of young people, partially by design, but it's something I think about often, because if we don't do it, someone else will do it. And this has broader implications in the long-term health of the land and the people. So I just think often about that. So I want to ask you about colloquial speak. So this is where I ask you to share a word, a phrase, or a saying that has been a meaningful part of your local experience, and why or how you come to value it as a colloquial speak. So you can use any of your localnesses. So I don't think we've talked about the Middle East, but anyway, you choose where you would like to take us on your colloquial speak soundscape.
I'll do my best. I'll give you a couple of. One example comes to mind. So I lived in a village in Germany because when I got married, my wife was German and she wanted to have our kids in her hometown. And she lives in a rural town in Rhine-Westphalia. And so in this town, because it's rural, there was, small village, not even a town, a village. I spoke English, she spoke English, we spoke English, of course. But for the most, everyone pretty much English, except for a handful of families. And she likes to say that only I could go into town and have everybody speaking English and me not learn anything, right? So everybody started speaking English and wanting to speak English. And she's like, and your German still sucks, right? So that's a funny part of not me taking on local language where I go, but having people start to mimic my language and speeches, the speech patterns, etc. So that's actually a true story.
Okay.
But when I have, in fact, gone into markets, Dubai is a good one, and the use of the term inshallah. Inshallah means if God wills it. And it's a beautiful word because it reminds you that God will laugh at your plans. And that that you need to be to be in alignment with his plan and ask him to support those plans. But being very focused and purposeful, I had concerns when that word was used in my or with me too often. Not because I didn't understand the power of having blessed your endeavors. That is very much part of my psyche and my spiritual rootedness, right? But, I would have to say on many occasions when I first got to Dubai that if anyone uses this word excuse to not have on my desk tomorrow at 5 p.m. or noon or whatever it was, we're going to have a problem. Because I know the God that I serve can get it done. So if you can't get it done, then we're talking about a different kind of God. So God does will it. And I'm sure that since God is all in this, so which leads you to the next word, which is mashallah, which is the past tense. That God has willed it. So you need to change inshallah to mashallah, because it needs to get done. Because what we're working on is good work.
Yeah. But those are great. Those are great examples because it is like an everyday thing. I hear it here because we have a pretty sizable Muslim population and. Yeah. When you don't take it so literally in terms of it really having meaning, then it becomes like a blow off. So yeah, I feel you. I love it. Okay. So I want to understand, so you have all this global experience and there are a few things that you've mentioned that I'm curious about, because a lot of the ways that I think your business model is working and how we necessarily have to think about development in emerging markets and Africa in particular is really understanding public-private partnerships. And I know that's something that you've worked on. I've worked on that in the past. I want to ask you, where do you feel like they have been very successful in your experience in Africa? Because I feel at a loss when I observe the structures of them. And, I ran a program that was a public-private partnership. It worked very well. That was in New York City. But I feel like they fall very flat or lopsided here on the continent. So what are your thoughts and in your experience in that role and in advising. Can you share?
Yeah, I'm certainly interested. I would love to hear more about your specific experiences in New York and other places. And my comments are not specific to Africa, although, and because Africa again is a continent, so you've got a whole spectrum of success stories and failures as in the United States and anywhere else. So we have to be careful not to lump the continent into one bucket. But to me, so there were a couple things that when I spent a lot of time on this topic with the European Commission as it related to a lot of what was happening in Eastern Europe and the Balkan. And we had the pleasure, and I co-authored with a small team, a pretty good piece on public-private partnerships on behalf of the European Commission. And we had the pleasure of looking across the globe at ones that were successful or ones that were not successful for learnings in order to figure out what kind of advice we could give to some of the policy people. And a couple things. So I'm shaking off a little bit of the dust, but one is clearly the governance aspect of it, because the public has an expectation and private has an expectation. And we all both want to get the deal done, but it's not that different to kind of the impact work that we do, right? You can think about it in terms of 3Ps, right? Whether it's the profit, the planet, the people, or you can think about it in terms of triple bottom line. You can think about it in all these different terms. At the end of the day, you're trying to find that commonality to move things forward. But time is money, style is different versus governments, egos are different, incentives are different, right? How one group is used to measuring success, what are the right metrics to use, right? All of these things kind of get bundled in this word of governance. And not only that, then you have the language issue, right? So let's assume that we can sort of figure out what the common goal is and agree, all right, this is the target profit margin, this is the target, these are the metrics. But then in that communication of depending on the stage that you're in, etc., there's a lot of issues that come through translation, right? And I'm speaking at a general level, and we can go deeper if you like. But at the end of the day, the most successful public models, let me restate, the most public-private partnerships were public models that were sustainable before the private sector came in. And the most successful private partnership models there were when the private part was successful, when the public came in. But if you have a situation in which literally the public side is weak and the private side is weak, and you're trying to think that bringing a weak left leg and a weak right leg together and somehow we're going to sort of make something grand, it can work, very challenging to work. And so when I've looked at these PPP models that weren't successful, if the governance side, if the objectives, et cetera, were not clear from the public bit, and they didn't come having really worked out that, and then the private side was either virtue signaling or really trying to get really understanding, what the other side was truly trying to do, and we're going to try to bubble gum this thing together and get it done so we can get the photo op and the ribbon cutting, and there's no true sort of vested interest into what the third thing is supposed to look like, it's going to fray. It's not going to make the budget. People are going to quit. Uber leavers are going to quit. You're going to have all of these additional things. And so it's very difficult for them to well. And so one of the things that can improve that, and I was often the person on these committees that was, I was the guy who's like, listen, all of that, right, but I'm going to channel the capitalist right now, or I'm going to channel the sovereign wealth fund, or I'm going to channel the money guy. I'm going to tell you what they may not tell you. And here's why I don't like it. And here's why I might say this one thing and try to get you to end up doing this other thing. And right. And here's how the fees are going to end up being not what you really think they should be. And remember, if even if the target return in that public-private partnership can be agreed upon, I don't want to make what on the private side because I've got a different opportunity cost than what you might make on the public side. And therein is a source of friction. So all of these things, not only the structure, the governance, but the people's own expectations about value they're creating in the thing. And so leverage becomes very important. Public entities that need to make decisions, and now getting specifically to Africa, and the role the Chinese have played in Africa and foreign money has played in Africa, and my experiences in the UAE and in Dubai. We more often than not, the reason why Dubai has been successful is because we always negotiated from a position of strength. We would love to have you in. Here's the value we create with you, but we don't need you. Remember this the plus years before that. Bob, if you're our kind of people, learn what's going on, really get stuck in here, love to have you because we're trying to do something awesome. Similarly, 30 years later, you're trying to put a team together, trying to put a business model together. It's always great when you're with people that really want to be there and everyone is coming from a decent position of strength. And so we can get all of that stuff out of the way to figure out how we can really sort of advance the cause for everyone, because that leverage is off. If the government side can, and Africa case in which, there's always that political risk issue, as we touched upon with civil conflicts in these markets. At the end of the day, whether it's de facto or de jure, every company in the emerging markets or the developing markets is in some form of public-private partnership.
Yeah.
Right? In the West, it's called the tax man. Right? This man is your partner, and he's getting whatever she can get if it's based on the state or federal. So it's all a version of a public-private partnership. Now, when you've got certain issues around privacy and governance and leadership in these countries and continuity of those policies and how they're going to be executed, all of those sorts of things, then it becomes more pronounced. But the reason why, God willing, inshallah, our company will be, I think public-private partnerships work, is that we're building the resiliency, very straight and open about how the governance model is going to work, what the expectations are, have clear KPIs around it. And I can tell you what we take our vitamin, and that's no. If it doesn't seem to be working, we don't press it because someone else will get it. And don't be in such desperate straits where you got to take that guy's money because that's the guy that's giving you money. We ran auctions on everything. If you don't want to come in, if this is a viable product, we should be able to have more than one or two interested, right? And so this is how we can sort of litmus test these partnerships: is who else is interested in this? And often than not, when there's only one or two that you're talking to, something's awfully missing because now they've got too much leverage, and you're probably not getting the deal that you think is the right deal for everybody because you just don't have the choices. Optionality is important when you're trying to put partnerships together.
That was a great tutorial on public-private partnerships and very helpful. And I think the key takeaways, particularly for thinking about Africa, is that governance piece, because that is the missing link for particularly being able to work on economic development. Is without that understanding and that commitment, it's right. It's very weak and it falls apart. And I think that's where we are. My struggle now, and what I've been focusing on quite a bit, is trying to inspire folks to really reconsider what our governance is here on the continent, because what we have borrowed or have been handed down from the former colonial administrations is a legacy that is not working. And so I think that what we could appreciate probably is looking a little bit more to structures in the Middle East or, other parts of the world that haven't taken, British law, whatever law, hook, line, and sinker, and have kind of really thought about how their culture needs to be input and part of the intuitive notion of governance. So thank you for that. So speaking of that, I do want to talk about mindset. So this is a good time to ask about your mindset hack. So what is your favorite or innovative mindset hack? This is one that you practice, one that you know of, or one that you can imagine.
Well, let's get the others out of the way. And I haven't had the pleasure of listening to too many of your shows yet, but my guess it'll be something like this. Prayer, yes. Rest, yes. Exercise, yes. Right. So those are the three, and of course, very, very important in that order. Prayer first, right?
Okay.
That alignment between your your sense of purpose, your spirituality, or emotional needs with your physical needs. All of that is before that prayer rest exercise. But I think, let me see if I can unpack that a little bit to give something a little bit more actionable to your listeners. And I've sort of dropped a few of these in how I respond to you. If my mindset isn't apparent after asking previous questions, then probably not. So it's the one, stop asking why and ask why not. It's got to be a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm super sensitive to people that want to say something can't get done, because I just rarely have I found that something that I wanted to do couldn't get done. I may not have been the person to do it. I might have helped to do it. I may not have been able to afford it. I might have been a little early, but I never felt that it couldn't be done. So the question is, are you mistaking what can't be done with what you're not willing to do? So stop out and ask why not. I think the second one would be, stop waiting for permission to do what you want to do. And I've seen, and this typically happens, it's kind of like interestingly, it's kind of like a bookend. The young are foolish enough to not know that they shouldn't try something to do something. And it's wonderful because they've been conditioned because of failure or fear to not give it a shot. And so you find a lot of risk, right? And I'm talking measured risk. I'm not just talking foolishness, but risk taking. Measured risk taking by the young, because, well, they can afford to do it. And what's the risk if they fall at one? It's not a big fall, and they don't have a lot of obligations yet. They don't have kids yet, and they don't have a lot of other things yet. The luxury per se, or believe they don't have the luxury to take certain kinds of risk. So they're waiting on the market to give them permission, or a friend. Now others, because they may be laden with student debt, or having to look after parents, they don't have or someone to give permission. So I don't mean breaking the law. I don't mean being cute with policy. I mean permission of yourself to identify what it is that is your thing and giving that a shot. And it doesn't have to mean jumping all in and blowing yourself up and making it binary. It's either going to be a huge thing or not. It means taking measured steps. Give yourself permission to learn and not wait for circumstance or someone to come in and say, hey, you want to do this or whatever. Get at it. And you can get at it in a way that to get those building blocks. I changed my course from going to business school to studying economics and not knowing what I was going to do with that, taking the advice of a man whose name I don't remember, but his name was probably Mohammed. And I'll never see that guy again. I couldn't. And that was the thing. I gave myself permission to not do what was the safe thing to do. And it was a game changer with regards to some of the wonderful experiences that I've had and some of the challenges I've had to endure, which leads to me, and that is get uncomfortable. And what that means is, if it's all clicking, you're probably not working hard enough. The challenge is probably not hard enough. Probably been a lot of people that have done it. So why do you want to do it, right? And there's a time and place for that, not the realities of it. But it doesn't matter if you've got $1 million in a fund, or you really are trying to scrape together a business plan or an idea. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable, because if you can get comfortable with the uncomfortable, one, you'll be resilient, you won't stop. And then hopefully when some good comes out of it, you'll appreciate that. Because if you can run that marathon without the water, and then someone shows up someplace and give you a glass, you're going to be pretty grateful. You're going to be pretty happy about that. But the expectation is, and which is why it didn't matter to me if there was a civil, it didn't matter if there was COVID. I need the process. And we say we're going to do this. It didn't happen. Didn't know it. And by the way, my partner now is battling cancer. Mr. Mutombo is not well. So I've got civil conflict, COVID, and cancer, right? Okay. God keep us. We will get through it, inshallah. And I'm using a Islamic term, but I am quite Christian, right? But there's power in word. And so when I'm not saying that, I'm saying thank you, God, and Heavenly Father, and all of things. But And that helps you get
Sure.
comfortable with the
Sure.
uncomfortable,
Sure.
right? But so those are specific acts that go beyond prayer, rest, and exercise that hopefully will be useful to some.
Absolutely. They definitely, I think, are, especially, I like the depth that you went into. And so I just have one more business type question before I ask you my final question. And that has to do with actually the money and finance part, because we're now dealing with the idea of the blockchain, and specifically for agriculture, commodities, things that you're working on. And so how, or are you considering what role that could play in your business? And is that part of does it have any role in your resilience plan or future planning?
Yes. Well, blockchain, yes. Bitcoin, maybe. Blockchain, I should say blockchain, perhaps. Bitcoin, probably not directly for us, because it comes down to social impact. We need to be able to hold ourselves and everybody in our supply chain accountable, and traceability is important to us. In fact, we're working on technology now that I'm able to know I want to have more farmers and cooperatives that we can directly source the coffee from, not 3 and 4 different intermediaries. The importer, exporter, this guy and that, the marketer, the brokers, and all of that. So we need infrastructure that disintermediate some of these in that supply chain, and also in the value chain, so that we can have greater impact with who we want to have impact, which is the farmers in country. The extent to which the blockchain will allow increased transparency, increased traceability, that is very important to us. And we are looking at and working through some solutions to do that. So that's how I think the chain can be helpful, because at the end of the day, this is about impact. And that's a mechanism through which we're able to measure that.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I know you've said work is your life, but there is a you that does something that's a little bit different than work at some point. So I like to ask if you're a reader, a watcher, or a listener. And what are some of your favorite reads, watches, or listens?
Read. I read a lot, immense amount, but it's typically to support my craft. It's whether it's on economic sustainability, whether it's regenerative agronomy practices, whether it's the science of coffee. I read. I learn as much about the business and the aspects of the coffee business, because I didn't grow up in this business. I use the same kind of skill set and the same kind of rigor that I've applied in the finance and investing world. I come to know more of this agricultural world and the coffee world and the just therein. So definitely a reader, a watcher also. And, you've put me in a position where I'm not to choose, because they're all important. Now, to be fair, I can probably allocate a percentage, right? So I would say reading is probably 30%.
Okay.
And watching, which is having conversations, meeting with people. Because now that so there was a lot of watching and listening. We're building the supply side in countries. And now we're on the demand side. So now we're selling, right? It took 2+ years to actually have the supply and a way to reliably provide the product into the US. And now I'm watching and listening on the demand side.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, it's a business, and I need to try to understand how we can create value. What's the right way to pitch it? What's the right way into these businesses, right? And we are primarily B2B.
Yeah.
So I would probably say it's a third, and a third.
Okay. All right. No favorites that you've come across? Favorite book, favorite song, favorite place to watch? Okay.
I'll tell you one of my favorite books, which I haven't read in many years, but it was a really great book for me. A book by Doug Hofstadter called Gödel, Escher, Bach.
Oh, okay.
Gödel, a mathematician. MC Escher, Kurt Gödel was a mathematician. MC Escher was an artist. And Bach, of course, was a musician. And one of the first times And I came out in late 1970s, early 1980s. So I think I was a friend in high school when I read this book. And what he did, thus came, there's service of the book. One of the things that he did well was to help identify the synergy between math and music and art. And that symmetry and that synergy helped me to really think in very liberal arts in a holistic way about creation and forms of creation and structures, and whether or not it was math or music. Again, this is also why I was a philosophy at Amherst, right? It just caused me to really think in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And so going down one more level, and now I'm about to lose some of your readers. What he was really getting at was identity and how when we're talking about forming who we are as people, forming who we are, the I and the ego is really the amalgamation of the other. And how do we, what identities do we in fact really have? You have to be careful if the bulk of that identity is defined by others, then you may think you have an identity, but what you've actually done is identified yourself by the other, and you think that you are that, and actually you are just a circumstance of conditioning and an environment, and it is very challenging to, if you're not first aware of how much free will do you think you have, how much object do you really think you have, how much are you really, versus what others have told you are. So there is that really interesting underpinning. So it was a seminal book for me. I haven't read it in a long time, but it put me on the path of really sort of looking at things in a layered way.
Nice. That sounds like a gem. So that will be in the show notes. And so, Bob,
there's one category that you didn't mention in writing. There's reading, watching, listening. You might want to add writing to your choice. In fact, I'm doing a lot of writing.
Okay.
I've written the book on the history of coffee. We'll publish that at some point. It's so boring that I don't even think anybody wants. So I wrote it for myself to make sure that I understand. And we are going to launch a newsletter on social impact and thought leadership.
I love it.
And so I'm putting all my thoughts and writings and stuff. So actually, I have to adjust a third, and a third. It's probably a third reading, 20% and 20% watching and listening. And then the other third is the writing.
Okay. I love it. So tell us where we can find you, where we can find Mutombo Coffee, and all your wonderful endeavors. This will also be the show notes, folks, but let's listen.
Well, yeah, mutombocoffee.com, MUTOMBO. And that spelling gets butchered all the time. So it's MUTOMBO coffee.com. We sell a little bit on Amazon, but again, we're really sort of B2B and corporate, but we have a website. So you can get some K-cups, some bag coffee, Stroop waffles, which are these cookies that go very nicely with the coffee, do cocoa. And one of the things that I'd like to work out with you and your listeners is anybody that wants to follow your podcast, we want to make sure that we will give them a nice discount and some ways to get them part of what we call the House of Mutombo. So I'd love for there to be a Glocal Citizens House of Mutombo collaboration. You guys can get all the good coffee and cocoa and waffles you like as you have conversations that matter.
Wonderful. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to collaborating with you. And before we sign off, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Looking forward to seeing you again.
Yay. All right, Glocal Citizens, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review, and check out the show notes. They're always rich, and you can get your discount. So please do so. So until next time, bye for now.